The autumn wind carried the scent of dust and dying grass across the Montana prairie as Catherine Holloway stumbled through the darkness, her silk traveling dress torn and mud-stained. Behind her, 3 days of running. Ahead, nothing but endless wilderness and the faint glow of a campfire in the distance. Her father's men would catch up by morning. She knew it in her bones, unless she found help or disappeared entirely. She pressed her hand against the empty pocket where her mother's sapphire ring had been until 2 hours ago, traded to a station master for stale bread and information about the nearest town. 12 miles. She'd never make it on foot. The blisters on her feet had opened and bled through her delicate leather boots. Boots designed for stepping out of carriages, not fleeing across wild country. If you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and give this video a like. It truly means everything to us and motivates us to bring you more quality content like this. Thank you for your support. The campfire belonged to a solitary figure, a man crouched beside the flames, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the night. Catherine's heart hammered as she approached, rehearsing her plea. She'd offer him anything. Money when she reached San Francisco, her father's connections, whatever he wanted. Stay where you are. The man's voice cut through the darkness, low and steady. He didn't turn around. State your business. My father is Richard Holloway. He owns the Territorial Bank in... I know who your father is. The man stood, and Catherine's breath caught. He was tall, powerfully built, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes like winter storms. A week's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. His clothes were worn but clean. Simple cotton shirt, leather vest, canvas trousers that had seen years of hard work. And I know what he does to people who can't pay their debts. Forecloses on their land, leaves families with nothing. Catherine's stomach dropped. You don't understand. I understand plenty. He finally looked at her fully, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, at her disheveled state, or recognition of genuine terror in her eyes. My name's Jacob Sutherland. Your father took my family's ranch 3 years ago when my mother got sick and couldn't make payments. She died the winter after we lost the land. I'm sorry. The words felt hollow, insufficient. But I'm not my father. I'm running from him, from a marriage he arranged to a man who... She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't speak about Carlton Ashford's cruel hands during their one chaperoned meeting. The way he'd looked at her like property he'd already purchased. Jacob studied her for a long moment. The firelight caught the hard planes of his face, a thin scar running through his left eyebrow. You're bleeding. He nodded toward her feet. Catherine looked down. Blood had soaked through her boots entirely now, dark stains spreading across the fine leather. Sit. It wasn't a request. Jacob grabbed his bedroll and spread it near the fire. Take those off before infection sets in. I can pay you, Catherine repeated, lowering herself carefully to the ground. Everything hurt. When I reach California, I have friends there who... Stop talking about money. Jacob knelt beside her, pulling medical supplies from his saddlebag. Out here, gold isn't what we need. Decency is. And right now, you need someone who won't hand you back to whoever you're running from. Catherine's eyes burned with unexpected tears. She'd prepared herself for demands, for negotiations, for the transactional nature of survival, not for simple kindness from a man who had every reason to hate her. Jacob worked in silence, carefully removing her ruined boots and cleaning her wounds with water heated over the fire. His hands were rough, calloused from years of labor, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. Catherine bit her lip against the sting of whiskey on raw flesh. "This is going to hurt worse before it gets better," he said quietly, "but I'll go slow." Catherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She watched his bent head as he wrapped her feet in clean bandages, torn from an old shirt. This close, she could see the sun-weathered skin of his neck, the strength in his forearms, the careful precision of his movements. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked. Jacob tied off the last bandage and sat back on his heels. "Because you're not property, you're a person. And because I've seen what happens to women in this territory who have nowhere to turn. It's not pretty. My father's men will be looking for me. If they find you with me, let me worry about that." Jacob stood and walked to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding grazing nearby. He returned with a blanket and draped it around Catherine's shoulders. "Get some rest. We move at first light." "We? You think I'm letting you stumble 12 miles to town on those feet?" A hint of humor touched his eyes. "I'm taking you to my place. It's not much, a cabin I built on free-range land, small herd of cattle I'm trying to build back up. But it's safe, and it's hidden. No one knows about it except me. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling." Jacob settled on the opposite side of the fire, his rifle within easy reach. "Sleep, Miss Holloway. You're safe tonight." Catherine pulled the blanket tighter, inhaling the scent of wood smoke and leather. For the first time in 3 days, she felt the tension begin to drain from her shoulders. She studied Jacob's profile in the firelight, the strong jaw, the watchful eyes, scanning the darkness beyond their small circle of light, the capable hands resting on his weapon. "Catherine," she said softly. "My name is Catherine." Jacob's gaze shifted to her, and something warm flickered in those storm-gray eyes. "Get some rest, Catherine." She closed her eyes, listening to the prairie wind and the crackling fire, and for the first time since fleeing her father's mansion, she believed she might actually survive this. Morning came with the smell of coffee and salt pork. Catherine woke to find Jacob already packing his camp, his movements efficient and practiced. Her feet throbbed with every heartbeat, but the sharp agony had dulled to a manageable ache. "Can you ride?" Jacob asked, not unkindly. "I've ridden since I was 6. Catherine pushed herself upright, then immediately regretted the movement as pain shot through her legs. She'd stiffened overnight, every muscle protesting. Jacob noticed her wince. Without a word, he crossed to her and extended his hand. "Easy, you're going to be sore for days." Catherine took his hand, warm, strong, steady, and let him pull her to her feet. The world tilted for a moment, and Jacob's other hand came to her waist, steadying her. They stood like that for a heartbeat too long, Catherine acutely aware of how close he was, the solid warmth of him, the way he smelled of sage and honest sweat. "Thank you," she murmured, stepping back. "Don't thank me yet." Jacob released her and walked to his horse. "It's a hard ride to my place. 6 hours at least, and we can't stop for long. Your father's men will be combing this area." The journey was every bit as difficult as Jacob had warned. Catherine rode behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, face pressed against his back to shield herself from the wind and sun. She felt every stone, every dip in the terrain, her injured feet screaming in the stirrups. But Jacob was patient. He stopped twice to let her rest, sharing his canteen and the last of his dried beef. He didn't speak much, but Catherine found comfort in his steady presence, the confidence with which he navigated the wilderness. They reached his cabin as the sun began its descent. It sat in a small valley between two rises, hidden from the main trails, with a creek running nearby and a modest corral housing a dozen cattle. The cabin itself was rough but well built. Solid logs chinked tight against the weather, a stone chimney, real glass in the windows. "It's not what you're used to," Jacob said, dismounting and reaching up to help her down. Catherine slid from the saddle into his arms, and again she felt that strange flutter in her chest at his nearness. "It's perfect," she said honestly. Jacob's eyebrows rose slightly. "You haven't been inside yet." The interior was sparse but clean. One room with a bed in the corner, a table and two chairs, a wood stove, shelves lined with supplies. Everything had its place. Everything was practical, well maintained. It was the home of a man who took pride in what little he had. "You can have the bed," Jacob said, setting his gear down. "I'll sleep in the barn." "That's not necessary." "It is." His tone was firm but not unkind. "You need proper rest to heal, and you need privacy. This is the best I can offer." Catherine wanted to argue, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Her feet were on fire, her body ached, and despite her best efforts, tears began to slide down her cheeks. Everything she'd held together for 3 days came pouring out. Fear, exhaustion, rage at her father, horror at what Carlton would have done to her if she'd stayed. "Hey." Jacob's voice softened. He pulled out one of the chairs. "Sit. Let me check those bandages." Catherine sank into the chair, covering her face with her hands as she cried. She felt Jacob kneel beside her, felt him carefully unwrap the bandages from her feet. His touch remained gentle, professional, but his presence was enormously comforting. "You did good," he said quietly. 3 days on your own, injured, scared, and you kept going. That takes real courage." "I don't feel courageous," Catherine whispered. "I feel like I'm falling apart." Courage isn't not being scared. It's being terrified and doing what you need to do anyway. Jacob finished examining her wounds and began rewrapping them with fresh bandages. "These are healing. Another week and you'll be back on your feet properly." A week. Catherine hadn't thought beyond the next moment, the next mile. A week meant safety. It meant time to figure out her next move. It meant time with this man who'd shown her more kindness in 12 hours than she'd known in her entire privileged life. "Why did you really help me?" Catherine asked, watching his bent head. The truth. Jacob's hands stilled. He looked up at her, and in the fading light through the window, his eyes were impossibly gray. "Because I see a woman worth saving," he said simply. "Not a banker's daughter or a runaway bride. Just Catherine, trying to survive." Something shifted between them in that moment. An understanding, a connection that went beyond circumstance. Catherine reached out and touched his cheek, feeling the roughness of his stubble beneath her palm. Jacob leaned into her touch for just a second before pulling back, clearing his throat. "You should rest," he said, his voice slightly rough. "I'll bring in water for washing and heat up some stew." Catherine nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her chest. She watched him move about the cabin, this man who'd lost everything because of her father's greed, who had every reason to turn her away, yet instead offered her sanctuary without asking for anything in return. That night, lying in Jacob's bed while he kept watch in the barn, Catherine stared at the ceiling and wondered what it meant that for the first time in her life, she felt truly safe. The days developed a rhythm. Catherine's feet healed slowly, and Jacob showed infinite patience with her limited mobility. He taught her how to properly tend the wood stove, how to recognize edible plants around the property, how to card wool from the 2 sheep he kept for winter clothing. "You don't have to do this," Jacob said on the 3rd day, finding her struggling to knead bread dough at his small table. "You're a guest, not an employee. I need to contribute something." Catherine's arms ached from the unfamiliar work, but she was determined. "Besides, when was the last time you ate bread that wasn't hardtack?" "Fair point." Jacob leaned against the doorframe, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "But you're doing it wrong. Here." He moved behind her, his arms coming around to guide her hands. "Fold it like this, then push with your palms. Use your body weight, not just your arms." Catherine's breath caught at his nearness. She could feel the solid wall of his chest against her back, the warmth of him, the strength in his hands as they covered hers. "Like this?" she managed. "Exactly like that." Jacob's voice was lower, rougher. His breath stirred the loose hair at her temple. For a moment, neither of them moved. Catherine felt her heart hammering, felt the heat rising in her cheeks. Then Jacob stepped back abruptly. "You've got it. I'll be outside, mending the fence." He grabbed his hat and was gone before Catherine could respond. She stood at the table, hands still in the dough, trying to calm her racing pulse. This was dangerous territory. Jacob was helping her out of decency, nothing more. She couldn't mistake kindness for something else, couldn't let herself feel things that had no future. But that night, lying in the darkness, she couldn't stop thinking about the warmth of his hands over hers, the solid presence of him at her back. By the end of the first week, Catherine could walk without wincing. She insisted on helping with the morning chores. Feeding the chickens, Jacob kept near the cabin. Gathering eggs, hauling water from the creek. Her soft hands developed blisters, then calluses. Her fair skin tanned despite the bonnet Jacob fashioned for her from an old shirt. "You're stronger than you look," Jacob observed one evening as she successfully pumped water from the well, without assistance. "I'm stronger than I thought I was," Catherine admitted. She straightened, wiping sweat from her brow. "My whole life I was told I was fragile, delicate, that I needed protecting." She met his eyes. "But I'm not fragile. I was just never allowed to be anything else." Jacob studied her in the golden evening light, something unreadable in his expression. "No," he agreed quietly. "You're not fragile at all." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken things. Catherine felt it like electricity in the air before a storm, the awareness, the attraction neither of them was willing to name. A gunshot shattered the silence. Jacob moved instantly, shoving Catherine toward the cabin. "Inside, now. Bar the door." "What?" "Now, Catherine." He grabbed his rifle from where it leaned by the door and ran toward the ridge overlooking the valley. Catherine's hands shook as she barred the door, then crept to the window. She could see figures on horseback, silhouetted against the setting sun. 3 men. Her stomach dropped as recognition hit. Her father's men had found them. She watched Jacob take cover behind a cluster of rocks, rifle raised. The lead rider, Catherine recognized him as Thomas Burke, her father's head of security, called out something she couldn't hear from this distance. Jacob's response was a warning shot that kicked up dust inches from Burke's horse. The standoff lasted eternal minutes. Catherine's heart was in her throat, watching Jacob face down 3 armed men alone. Finally, Burke and his companions wheeled their horses and retreated back over the ridge. Jacob remained in position for another 20 minutes before jogging back to the cabin. Catherine threw open the door before he could knock. "Are you hurt?" She ran her hands over his arms, his chest, checking for injuries. "I'm fine." Jacob caught her hands, stilling them. "Catherine, breathe. They found us. They'll come back with more men. You could have been killed." "Hey." Jacob's hands came up to frame her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I'll die before I let them take you back. Do you understand me? I'll die before I hurt you. Before I let anyone hurt you." The intensity in his voice, in his eyes, stole Catherine's breath. She stood there, his hands warm against her cheeks, and knew with absolute certainty that he meant every word. "I won't let you die for me," she whispered. "That's not your choice to make." Jacob's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, an unconscious caress that made Catherine's eyes flutter closed. "You matter, Catherine. Not because of who your father is, or what you're worth in a marriage contract. Because you're you." Catherine opened her eyes and found him staring at her with such raw hunger that her knees went weak. The air between them felt thick, charged. Jacob's gaze dropped to her lips, and Catherine's breath hitched. "Jacob," she whispered, and it was permission and plea all at once. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and fierce, weeks of tension and denial breaking free all at once. Catherine gasped against his mouth, and Jacob's arms came around her, pulling her flush against him. She clutched at his shirt, kissing him back with equal fervor, tasting coffee and need and something that felt dangerously like home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "We can't do this," he said roughly. "Why not?" "Because you deserve better than a cowboy with nothing to his name. Because in a few weeks, you'll leave for California and your real life, and this will just be a strange chapter you'll want to forget." Catherine pulled back to look at him properly. "Is that what you think? That I want to forget this? Forget you?" "You should." Jacob's jaw was tight. "I can't give you anything like what you're used to." "I don't want what I'm used to." Catherine's voice rose. "I spent 24 years in a gilded cage being groomed as a prize for men like Carlton Ashford. I was property with a pretty face and the right last name. Here, with you, I'm finally real. I'm finally me." "Catherine, I love you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I know it's impossible and impractical, and you probably think I'm confused or grateful or—" Jacob kissed her again, softer this time, but no less thorough. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "I love you too," he said quietly. "Been fighting it since that first night when you looked at me like I was something more than what your father made me." Catherine laughed, a watery sound caught between joy and tears. "What do we do now?" "We figure it out together." Jacob brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But first, we need to make a plan. Burke will be back, and next time he'll bring enough men to be a real problem." They stayed up late into the night, planning their next move. The nearby town of Redemption was too close to her father's influence. But there was a mining camp, 3 days' ride north, where Jacob knew people. They could disappear there, start fresh. "We'll leave in 2 days," Jacob decided. "I need to sell the cattle, gather supplies. And we need to be smart about this. Travel separately initially in case they're watching the roads." "I'm not leaving without you," Catherine said firmly. "You won't have to." Jacob took her hand across the table. "I promise you, Catherine, we go together or not at all." That night, they lay together in the small bed, chaste but intimate, learning the shape of each other in the darkness. Jacob held her close, one arm around her waist, the other beneath her head. Catherine felt safer than she'd ever felt in her father's mansion, with its locked doors and armed guards. "Tell me about your mother," she said softly. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "She was strong, practical. After my father died, she ran the ranch herself for 5 years. Taught me everything I know about cattle, about hard work, about integrity." His voice roughened. "When she got sick, the doctor bills piled up. Your father's bank held the note on our land. He could have given us time. Instead, he foreclosed the day after she died." Catherine's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault." Jacob's arm tightened around her. "You're not him, Catherine. You're nothing like him. I benefited from his cruelty my whole life without knowing it. And now you're choosing different. That matters." Catherine turned in his arms to face him. In the moonlight through the window, his face was all shadows and strong lines. She traced the scar through his eyebrow. "How did you get this?" "Horse kicked me when I was 15. Trying to break a wild Mustang before I was ready." Jacob caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I was always stubborn." "I noticed," Catherine smiled. "It's one of your better qualities." They talked until exhaustion claimed them, sharing stories, learning each other's histories. Catherine told him about her mother's death when she was 12, how her father had become colder afterward, more focused on money and status. Jacob told her about winters so harsh he'd lost half his herd, about the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. As dawn approached, Catherine realized she'd never had conversations like this. Real, honest, vulnerable. In her old life, everything was performance, every word calculated for effect. With Jacob, she could just be. The next day brought unexpected complications. Catherine was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching. Jacob was at the far end of the property, checking his cattle. Before she could run inside, 2 riders crested the ridge. But these weren't her father's men. One was a woman, perhaps 40, weathered by sun and hard living, with kind eyes and a rifle across her saddle. The man beside her was older, gray-bearded, with a sheriff's star pinned to his vest. "You must be the girl Jacob's been harboring," the woman said, not unkindly. She dismounted with practiced ease. "I'm Sarah Crane. This is Sheriff Morrison. We're friends of Jacob's." Catherine's mind raced. Jacob hadn't mentioned expecting visitors. "It's all right," Sheriff Morrison said, holding up a hand. "We're not here to cause trouble. Jacob sent word yesterday, asking me to marry you two soon as possible. Figured it was time I checked out the bride." Catherine's heart skipped. "He what?" "Asked me to perform a marriage ceremony," the sheriff repeated. "Seemed urgent. Said something about needing to make things legal before her father's men come back," Jacob said, appearing from behind the barn. His expression was tight. "Sarah, Sheriff, thanks for coming on short notice." "You asked them to marry us without asking me?" Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks, part embarrassment, part anger. Jacob had the grace to look sheepish. "I was going to discuss it with you today. But Catherine, if we're married, your father loses his legal claim to you. You'd be my wife, under my protection. It makes you safer." "So this is about strategy, not—" Catherine's voice trailed off. Jacob crossed to her in 3 long strides. He took both her hands, ignoring their audience. "It's about everything," he said quietly. "It's about wanting you safe. It's about wanting you, period. It's about waking up next to you for the rest of my life, if you'll have me. He dropped to one knee right there in the dirt, still holding her hands. "Catherine Holloway, I've got nothing to offer you but a half-built life and a heart that's completely yours. But if you'll marry me, I swear I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of you." Catherine's vision blurred with tears. Behind Jacob, Sarah Crane was dabbing at her own eyes with a handkerchief. "Yes," Catherine whispered. Then louder, "Yes, of course yes." Jacob stood and kissed her, swift and hard, before pulling back with a grin that transformed his usually serious face. "Then let's do this before you change your mind." The ceremony was simple. They stood by the creek with the afternoon sun painting everything gold. Sarah served as witness, producing a simple gold band she insisted Catherine take as a gift. "It was my mother's," she said. "Never had a daughter to pass it to. Seems right it should go to a bride in need." Sheriff Morrison read the vows from a worn prayer book. When he reached, "In sickness and in health, for richer or poorer," Jacob's eyes locked with Catherine's, and she knew he was thinking of his mother, of the ranch lost, of every hard thing that had shaped him. "I do," Jacob said firmly when his turn came. Catherine's voice didn't shake when she repeated the words. "I do. Then by the power vested in me by the Montana Territory, I pronounce you man and wife. Jacob, you may kiss your bride." This kiss was different, softer, sweeter, full of promise instead of desperation. When they parted, Catherine was officially Catherine Sutherland. Sarah insisted on staying to cook a celebratory dinner. While she and the sheriff tactfully remained outside afterward, Catherine and Jacob retreated to the cabin, suddenly shy with each other. "We don't have to," Jacob started. "I want to," Catherine interrupted. "If you do." "Catherine, I've wanted to, since the moment you touched my face and looked at me like I was someone worth seeing." The night that followed was tender and slow, Jacob's calloused hands gentle on her skin, his voice murmuring reassurances when Catherine tensed. "Go slow," she whispered at one point. "It hurts." "I've got you," Jacob said against her hair. "We'll go as slow as you need. I'll never hurt you, Catherine, never." And he kept that promise, patient and careful, until hurt transformed into pleasure, until Catherine forgot to be nervous, forgot everything except the solid warmth of him, the rightness of being joined together in every way possible. After, lying tangled in the sheets with Jacob's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Catherine felt a peace she'd never known. Whatever came next, her father's rage, the uncertainty of their future, they would face it together. Burke and his men returned 4 days later with a force of 8 riders. But this time, Jacob wasn't alone. Word had spread through the small community of homesteaders and ranchers that Jacob Sutherland had taken a wife, that Richard Holloway's men were threatening a lawful marriage. The unspoken code of the territory was simple. You defended your neighbors. When Burke crested the ridge, he found not a solitary cowboy, but a line of armed men. Sarah's husband Tom, Sheriff Morrison, 3 brothers from the neighboring ranch, and a half-dozen others who'd suffered under Holloway's business practices over the years. Catherine watched from the cabin window, rifle in her hands. Jacob had taught her to shoot over the past week, heart in her throat. Jacob stood at the center of the line, shoulders back, his own rifle held with casual competence. "The girl is legally married, Burke," Sheriff Morrison called out. "She's no longer Holloway's property. Her father wants her back for her own safety," Burke argued, but even from this distance, Catherine could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "She's not of sound mind." "I'm perfectly sound." Catherine threw open the cabin door, ignoring Jacob's sharp gesture to stay inside. She walked to stand beside her husband, lifting her chin. "I'm married of my own free will to the man I love. Tell my father he has no claim on me anymore. I'm Catherine Sutherland now." Burke stared at her, then at the line of determined faces. Finally, he spat into the dirt. "Holloway's not going to like this. Holloway can take his feelings and his threats back to wherever he came from," Tom Crane said evenly. "We don't take kindly to men trying to steal wives out here. Tends to end badly for anyone foolish enough to try." The standoff lasted another tense minute before Burke wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over," he called back. "Yeah, it is," Jacob said quietly, but his arm came around Catherine's waist, pulling her close. They watched Burke's group disappear over the ridge. Slowly, the tension broke. Sarah came forward to hug Catherine. "Welcome to Montana territory, honey, where the women are tough and the men know better than to cross them." That night, after their neighbors had departed and the valley settled into peaceful darkness, Catherine and Jacob sat on the small porch Jacob had built, watching stars emerge. "What if he tries again?" Catherine asked, leaning against Jacob's shoulder. "Then we'll face it together." Jacob's arm tightened around her. "Together, Catherine. That's how we do everything from now on." "Together," she echoed, and the word felt like a promise, like a prayer, like the first page of a story they'd write themselves. 6 months later, Catherine barely recognized herself. Her hands were permanently roughened from work, her skin tanned, her body stronger than it had ever been. She could rope a calf, shoot a rifle with decent accuracy, and bake bread that didn't resemble hardtack. More importantly, she was happy, truly bone-deep happy in a way she'd never imagined possible. Jacob had added a room to the cabin, a bedroom so they could use the main room for living and working. He'd surprised her with it on her birthday, having worked secretly with Tom Crane for weeks. "It's not fancy," he'd said, looking nervous as he showed her the hand-carved headboard he'd made. "It's perfect," Catherine had whispered, tracing the pattern he'd carved, wildflowers and wheat, symbols of their life together. Their herd had grown to 30 head. Sarah taught Catherine how to preserve food for winter, how to spin wool into yarn. In return, Catherine taught Sarah's daughter how to read, using the few books Jacob owned. Word had reached them through traveling merchants, and Richard Holloway was furious, but ultimately powerless. His daughter was legally married, and any attempt to forcibly retrieve her would constitute kidnapping. Carlton Ashford had married someone else, a railroad heiress, and seemed happy to forget. Catherine looked at him, this man who'd saved her in every way that mattered, who'd taught her she was stronger than she'd ever imagined, who loved her not for what she represented, but for who she was. "Not even for a second," she said honestly. Jacob's smile was slow and warm. He set down his tools and pulled her close, kissing her thoroughly, despite being covered in dirt and sweat. "Good, because you're stuck with me now, Mrs. Sutherland. That's the best thing anyone's ever told me." As autumn painted the valley in gold and red, Catherine stood in the doorway of their cabin and looked out at the life they were building together. It wasn't easy. Winters were brutal. Money was always tight. The work never ended. But it was theirs, earned through sweat and determination and love that had been tested and proven true. She heard Jacob's footsteps behind her, felt his arms come around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he murmured. "That I ran away from one life and ran straight into the one I was meant to live all along." Catherine turned in his arms to face him. "That the banker's daughter tried to escape and fell for the poor cowboy who hated everything she stood for. And somehow, that became the best thing that ever happened to her. Jacob's eyes crinkled at the corners. Everything she stood for, huh? Not everything anymore. Not everything, Catherine agreed, pulling him down for a kiss. Just the important things, like love and partnership, and building something that matters. Together, Jacob said against her lips. Together, Catherine confirmed. And in that word was their whole world. Past, present, and every bright future stretching before them. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Catherine and Jacob's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.